Fantastic. Hello, Hassan.
Everyone. Hi, Mark. How are you?
I'm very well, sir. Great to see you again. How you going?
Great to see you. You seem to be literally sitting on a fireside chat in Melbourne.
Yeah.
For me, I will have to step out on a terrace to make it fireside.
It's like 10 p.m. at night. I could light the fire because we're in the middle of winter. So the theme is perfect. And it's a topic that I love. So
Yeah.
fantastic.
So welcome to all the participants who are joining us virtually. I'm joined by Mark, who is also very passionate about culture. Um, For me, culture is one of the most important levers for business growth, and it has become even more important in the current environment. So, if we go back in 2020, when COVID hit all of us, uh, you know, there were probably two or three scenarios. Some of the companies who had invested heavily into the culture, or they were investing into the culture, and they had a strong, positive ownership based culture, so they were able to generally react better. That's what I've seen in Pakistan. But then there were other companies who had not invested so heavily, and they were like caught off guard, and took them some time to move on with the uncertain environment. And I think one of the key things here comes is that the culture is formed by all of us. So it's a way of doing things, and it's about people. So if people do not believe in what is being said to them, you cannot just switch on culture and switch off culture. Um, Personally, in my experience in CCI, very briefly before I pass it on to Mark, there were three things. It boiled down to three things. We had heavily invested into culture and values for the last 3-4 years before COVID. And then we had formed a leadership community of top 150 leaders in the company just before COVID. And these two elements really helped us to quickly start communicating, engaging people at all levels, and the message went on, and we were able to adapt very quickly. And then on top of it, we sent a message down the line to the whole organization that no one will be left behind during this COVID period. And that kind of created a circle of safety for everyone, and they could focus on the change and challenge that they were experiencing. So that's the kind of context, and we'll talk more about culture. We'll break down into three themes. One is, how do you build the culture? How do you build the tribe? What does it entail? Secondly, we'll talk about the different pillars of culture when you have the strategy and form the strategy of building the culture. And finally, we'll leave some thoughts at the end towards the hybrid and the new ways of working, and how does culture support onto that. With that, Mark, I would like to throw light on the first question, which is around, how do you build a tribe? How do you say that you have a strong culture? And especially in the context when such a change hits you.
Yeah. I love, it's, as a speaker, culture has now become probably the single most sought after topic that I'm asked to present to right now. And when I present to culture, I have to start and say, if you really want to have a serious conversation about culture in corporate sense, you've got to think about where the word comes from in an ethnological sense, and that is tribal. And a lot of the same rules that bond a tribe are the rules that you bring in to your business to make it happen. Now, a classic example of that, and this is practical, you've got to think about how you apply this, is an idea of traditions, right? Tribes are built and bonded by traditions. And you can break traditions down into 4 types of traditions. We have, in a tribal sense, we have traditions to celebrate. Think about your birthday. Everywhere around the world, we have birthdays. In fact, I'll show you something to do with birthdays and a candle in a second, but that celebration is one way. We have traditions to rejuvenate. Think about New Year. Think about New Year around the world. Think about New Year in Lunar New Year in China, for example. That's a different type of tradition. We have traditions to honor. We honor by way of traditions. Weddings is a classic example. I've been to weddings in your part of the world, and the traditions are phenomenal, but that's all about honoring the occasion, right? and more so than we have in Western to some degree. And then there's a fourth type of tradition, which is super important. And that is we actually have traditions to mourn, right? We mourn passing and death. In business, we mourn people leaving a business as well. But these four types of traditions are a great starting point. If you want to build a tribe, what are the traditions that you have and that you've created for these four main categories? And then another question would be, how do you make those work equally powerfully when you're in a hybrid world? So this is, for example, let me show you, like around the world, the birthday candle, right? It's a tradition that we all know. Birthday candles comes from Germany, mid 1700s. And we all know this tradition of birthday candles and blowing them out. Now, thinking COVID, we don't want to blow candles and eat cake that somebody else has blown on, do we? And how do you blow out candles in a remote environment? Just a classic, simple example. So 4 types of traditions to think about. That's what we can do to build our company culture up. How do you see those playing out though, Hassan? Because I know your approach is people-centric, right? That human-centric approach. So how do they look for you and how do you see them relevant?
I think it's a beautiful way of depicting, building a tribe and the traditions. And I'll talk a bit more about it. But here, in terms of the culture, my belief is that what COVID has pushed companies to think about is taking a more human-centric approach. So it has brought people right at the center of everything because, like I was talking about, if you have invested into the culture or not invested, and I don't know, audience can actually start commenting in the chat as well, how it was in their companies. But, you cannot all of a sudden change the course unless you have certain elements. So what I see in COVID is, I'll give you 2 examples, things like trust, empathy, inclusion, engagement, all these have got new meanings in COVID. That's what I see. Trust, for example, so companies were forced to work virtually, right? So what were companies thinking and what were leaders thinking? If they were thinking that whether the people at home are working or not and how to, create a compliance culture, then that doesn't mean trust. So trust meant in COVID is that people were expecting honesty, transparency in the communication, really telling them the truth about the business, about the people, about everything. Empowering people and trusting them with quick decision-making and remote working. Similarly, if we go on to the empathy, one of my interesting insight was that all of us, we went into massive communication, like one-to-many town halls and, a lot of these weekly meetings and briefings. What I realized was that in COVID, what was really important was one-to-one engagement at all levels. That really created that empathy because people had different emotions when COVID hit us. They were going through different kind of emotions and challenges and feelings. So unless we do one-to-one and really create that empathetic culture, you cannot pull all of them at the same level of that resilience, agility, and transformation. So I think the human-centric approach became more pronounced and will be going forward as well. That's how I see it here. Yeah, does it make sense, Mark?
100%. And actually, to that point, that human-centric approach. In fact, I'm going to encourage what you said as well. If the audience can put through in chat, please. I'd love to hear, what did you find in your own organizations happen from a human-centric approach with the themes of trust, empathy, or how did you carry on the traditions within your business when your whole workforce is remote? Now, to your point, Hassan, like that idea, the one thing that really bonds tribes as well is that tribes buy in to a set of values and principles, and they live by that set of principles. That's human-centric, right? And what the danger was when we saw COVID, certainly here hitting, it became very apparent which companies had ingrained their values as behaviors versus ones that had got the values as posters on a wall, but were not enacted on. Through things like the principles you're saying, where if trust is a value, why do you need to check in on your people? If you're living and breathing it, you don't need to if it's a value, because you know they're doing it. unless of course you know that it's become a poster on the wall and you've not driven that now and refreshed it. So this is really a critical piece: is, are your values being lived at a human-centric level and not just some superfluous sloganeering to put out to the broader world?
Absolutely. Tell me, Mark, I mean, I will give a comment on this comment as well, but let's go on and move into the second theme, which is primarily around, the pillars of culture. How do you build the culture? So let's go with that. And if you can share your thoughts, and then, we will take it from there.
Yeah, for sure. So if you think culture, the way I talk to this is, there's 4 evolution pillars of culture, and it's like an old Roman style temple with the 4 corner columns, and your culture is the roof on top, meaning you've got to balance all 4. And what are the 4? The first culture pillar is administration. What does that mean? You need to make sure your processes are tight and you have a clear playbook of consistency in your business. And in this world, in COVID, every business, their whole workforce is working remote. That means changing and updating your processes, does it not? Just at a basic level, what does that even look like? So administration culture, are your processes tight? Are they clear? Is everybody doing it? Are they not too convoluted to slow you down? The second pillar of culture, though, is a culture pillar of performance. And what is that? That is where everybody is being accountable for their goals, for their actions. They are self-accountable. Managers, as leaders, are coaches. They help people realize their goals, and they put that human-centric approach on, to your point. The danger is if you've got too high a performance culture and it's overemphasis, that's where we step into a win at all costs, which is not healthy either, right? You've got a healthy balance with performance culture, but not a win at all costs. The third pillar evolution for culture is then the pillar of learning, a learning culture. Now, I love what you said. In my experience from what happened last year, the businesses that had continual learning on their calendar, that didn't get sacrificed when they're busy, were the ones that responded well to work from home remotely. Why? Because they were kind of used to that scenario. A learning culture is where knowledge sharing is valued, knowledge sharing is transferred, and it's not owned by merely HR departments, because who owns knowledge? Everybody owns knowledge. HR know how to channel and funnel that through on-the-job learning, formal classroom, and self-paced. But then you've got the fourth culture pillar of evolution, that is a unique culture. And this is the one a lot of people aspire to be, right? That's the innovative one. It's the one that people see, and it's where people associate with the likes of Google or Facebook, but often it's because of the fluffy, fun stuff. You wear your flip-flops to work, you get fed free food on a Friday, you come down to slide to work. Now that's all great. However, if you don't have tight processes, if you don't have performance culture, if you're not continually learning, your business is still going to crumble because it's not sustainable on unique innovation alone. So these four culture pillars are all important, and it's which ones are you giving attention to, which need updating, which need rejuvenating for the hybrid environment. Does that make sense, Hassan? Do these four, can you see it in your world?
Lovely. That makes sense. That makes sense. And I can see, I've seen some cultural transformation. And, if you focus on one or two and not all, then, you would see that the impact is not as you want. So for me, the cultural change, when we talk about, or when you're creating a culture, it is for me art and science. So the science of having, what are we trying to create and what are those pillars? But how do you do that? And again, over there, the human-centric approach comes into it. The people come right into it. In earlier discussion, you said something that the values are just written on the wall. So really, what you look at it, when you're trying to create a culture, you have to go to the deepest level of the culture, the third and the deepest level, which is around changing the underlying assumptions of the people, things that are not written in the company manuals, things that are not written anywhere, but people do certain things the way, they feel that they got to do. That's where the traditions come in. That's where the rituals come in. That's where the stories come in and the myths come in. So I think the art part of culture is very, very important. And you put the people in, go and change the underlying assumptions. Now, I'll also relate one example to one of the pillars. Due to shortage of time, I'll just talk about one pillar. For example, the first pillar, which is the administration and process piece, which you're trying to create in terms of the right culture. So if you're trying to have a very innovative culture and whatever it is, but then you build a very complicated process which needs 10 signatories to sign off something, that is telling me that 9 of them are not trusted. And, so you're not putting people into the center when you are creating all these 4 pillars. So finally, my thoughts, a lot of time when we talk about culture, we focus more on the formal piece, like you also mentioned about it, the values being hung up on the wall, or the vision statement, and, painting the whole company with those statements. Those are good. Those are all formal ways, but then go deeper, go into those informal ways of what are our traditions, what are our, stories, myths, rituals that need to change to have an informal impact on the culture, which is far bigger and far more sustainable as well, in my opinion.
100%. It's in the behaviors. You recognize those behaviors. You recognize where I'm acting. It's funny because you mentioned the word change there. To change a culture, when I do change pieces with businesses, my opening line there is companies don't change. You know why? Because you buy a company off the shelf of in Australia, it's ASIC for $400 in GST. A company only becomes a company when you put people in it. And you need to change people, and change within people happens at an individual, not a collective level. And you do that through consistency at a human-centric approach to every individual. Change is not a company thing. Change is an individual thing. The company drives that individual change, and you help everybody navigate that path. Human-centric approach.
Absolutely right. The only thought to build on it, I mean, many ways, based on my experience, I see culture and leadership intertwined. We are not talking about leadership, but you're absolutely right. Culture, the centerpiece is people, right? That's where you change. But what leaders do is provide the right context for people around them. So people, you don't ask people to change. You try to provide the right context for people to change from within, so go deeper into their belief and underlying assumptions, and change happens there. And that is what is sustainable. So
100%.
yeah, with the current environment, I mean, a lot of that is happening. And I believe a lot of companies are focusing on the culture. So you got to look at all aspects of culture, all pillars, but then put people into it when you are thinking about it and designing any intervention. So Mark, let's move on to the final bit, because I think we have a few minutes left now. In the current environment, there's a lot of talk of hybrid working, new ways of working. What do we do? What is the right model? So what are your thoughts about it, and how does culture piece fit into it?
Yeah, it's interesting. I pulled up some latest stats on this one. So I've been watching this closely because I've been asked to write a lot of media about exactly this. And when this first landed, what we saw was a lot of tech companies, especially, announcing all our staff can go work from home indefinitely, permanently, for as long as they like. And now we're seeing a bit of retraction back from that, right? So you've got the Googles and the Facebooks of the world like going, well, we're going to have our staff working 2 days a week, right, remotely. Yeah. We've got, and even the companies that are tech companies that that build the tools that allow us to work fully from home, don't trust fully remote environments. They're encouraging even people to come back in, right? So it's like, what does that look like? I think the important thing to take note of here is you can't cut and copy a playbook of another business and assume that's going to work for yours, because your culture is not necessarily the same. You've got to really think about what is your culture like, and that human-centric side and the connectivity that your people want and need. Yes, there's potentially an element that's going to stay, and it must stay as this hybrid work from home, but you've got to find a balance that suits your business, your industry, your vertical, your state of strategy right now. That's what I'm seeing. But what do you find with that, Hassan? What do you find?
So I think, in Pakistan, around the industry, when I look at it, so a lot of companies are talking about different models. So whole range of model, like you talked about it, completely virtual to No, everyone has to come back. Lot of companies have continued somehow bringing people into the offices or most of their offices during COVID time as well. Other companies got used to it and they started gaining that confidence and trust that the remote working is working. And also the employer perspective, if you look at it, it is very cost effective as well in many ways, right? At the end of the day, productivity is not dependent on whether the person is in the office or working remotely. So I think there is that thought in the market. Companies will take different approaches, and like you said, it will depend on industry. It will depend on the business that you're in. Culture has to serve the strategy as well, because it has to be aligned with it, and companies to companies it would vary. So that will also determine. But at the end, like you said, the readiness, the cultural readiness will be very important in terms of which approach do you take from this whole vast options that are available to the companies. So probably readiness is important, what culture you want to have in the company, and then accordingly go with it, what works. Um, Finally, what you say, please think about what 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 are those traditions and what are those values, what are those elements of culture that you want to create in your organization. And for that, what is the best working model for your organization? That's how I see it. Um, and that will determine that your strategy is fully served by the culture as well. That's what I think. So as leaders, you need to be very clear and then define it for the people as well, and go with the approach that serves your business and your people the best.
With the people at the center. Hassan, but I saw there's one question. I think it would be beautiful to answer this for Mariam real quick. What's your recommendation on learning and development to focus on growing people managers inherently secure about the work from home model? I actually want to answer that because I was a learning and development manager for a web conferencing company for over 2 years, where more than 90% of the work was hybrid and remote. So I've got a lot of experience on this thing. And I would say this actually ties in, Mariam, my answer to this, and I'm sure Hassan will have one. My answer to this is this ties into that learning pillar of culture evolution, is that I would do train the trainer and get a learning culture embedded where people are comfortable with elements and aspects of online learning. And a part of that is empowering and training your leaders to be well presented remotely, because a lot of them don't know how to do it. They don't know how to stay present to the camera and draw their people in when they're remote. I think simple basic skills, build your learning culture, ingrain continual learning, of which hybrid and remote and virtual learning is a part, and then train leaders in fundamental train the trainer skills of how they deal with people in this environment. That's just a couple of quick tips to answer that. Hassan, I just saw that. I'm sure you might.
Just one comment on that. I think there are a lot of funny stories as well when we started with online learning during COVID period, and people were really uncomfortable with it as well. But we have come a long way. So I absolutely agree with you. What I experience in my company as well, that we put leaders into actually developing other talent as well. So they are part of the faculty. They are delivering the training as well. So they have to become very comfortable. And now, having gone through 12 to 18 months, we have upskilled the capabilities of not only L&D team, but our leaders as well. So now when they are there to deliver online training, I think the acceptability and the impact of virtual learning has gone up. So yeah, I mean, it's a slow steps, but it is very effective, because what it does is that it makes the learning available so easily.
Yeah, and it gets people more comfortable in this hybrid environment all around. Mariam, I'll actually send to Ali some links for some content you can tap to help with that, because like I say, as a learning and development professional for over a century now, or about quarter century, that's my world fully. So I'll send you some stuff you can access for that. Hassan, it's been awesome talking to you. I'm conscious of time because I respect that as well from everybody.
Same. Any final comment, one-liner from you?
Yeah, look, I think if you come back to what I said before, that culture is like a tribe. And there's a quote, you know, they say that culture lives in the hearts and minds of people in a tribal sense. Well, guess what? The same's true in a business sense. Your culture lives in the hearts and minds of all your people. Start appealing, deal first to the heart and then the head. Yeah. That would be my closing idea.
Yeah, great. 20 years ago, when I was leading a cultural transformation in a big multinational, I came up with an example, and that has stuck with me. A winning culture is the one where an ordinary person gives extraordinary results willingly to the best of their ability. And that only happens when they believe in it. So we talked about culture, we talked about the traditions, we talked about the formal and informal ways of changing culture. We also talked about the 4 pillars of culture and how important it is to balance and manage and focus on all 4. And finally, we talked about when you're creating a culture or changing a culture, especially in the environment like, you know, when the VUCA world hits you, you need to put people right in the center. Trust, empathy, these are the things that will make your culture stronger and bring people along, because everyone is going through different set of emotion. If you talk about the change transition curve, everyone is not going through the transition curve at the same time. They are going through that transition curve at their own pace. So it is very important to put people in the center and engage with them at the emotional level, especially in a place like Pakistan. We are a very emotional nation. So based on my global experience, unless you connect with people emotionally, you know, they wouldn't believe in it, and the change that you try to create on the culture front will not be sustainable. That's my concluding thoughts. It's a pleasure talking to you, Mark, as well. I wish we had longer time. Probably I'll connect with you offline.
Great to see you, Sam. Thanks everybody for joining on this session. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much.
Have
a good day.
All right. Okay. So thank you so much, Mark, and thank you so much, Hassan, for a wonderful conversation. So